Kunstenpunt. My name is Wouter. Today we do it in English. Not that I am so good at it, but since last week we are over the whole world. The whole world is watching, and we want to think inclusive. Also, the question we want to talk about or discuss tonight is not something exclusively for Belgium. It's a question that is asked nowadays in almost every country: how to think culture in this pandemic society. Since yesterday, the shops are open again, but the theaters, the concert halls, the cinemas are still closed. We've seen online an explosion of many artistic expressions to comfort people, to bring us some necessary humor, to support the people in the care, to distract in these times of isolation. Art felt very necessary the last months, as necessary as food, hospitals, and toilet paper. But today, as this exit, so-called exit, is running again without culture, we need to zoom out and to dig deeper at the same time in the situation we are in, how to survive this virus as artists, as cultural institutions, as society also. And it's not only an economical question, it almost gets into a kind of existential brain fuck. What are we for? What is our role? What are the challenges that we are facing? How do we relate to business as usual? For all these difficult questions, we only have 1 hour to change the whole future of the arts in Belgium. So let's start it. You can contribute your questions as last week in the comments section of Facebook. They might inspire us. There's a kind of magical system that we get the most relevant questions directly in our chats. And if there would be technical problems, just push the refresh button and we hope to come back soon. This refresh button is a little bit the metaphor also for art and culture itself. And the question is, will it help to press the refresh button? And for this question, we have invited again 4 inspiring voices. We have Rashida Aziz. She's an activist and a writer linked to this marvelous place in Brussels called Le Space. And that had to close its doors even before the lockdown. And we all know her from her book, No One Will Sleep Here Tonight. Agnes Kwakkels is the new co-coordinator of Kai Theater. Before she worked in Buddha Kortrijk, where she had lots of reflections on this idea of the fantastic institution. How do we dream our cultural institutions? And Anne van der Meulen is coordinator also in Brussels of Globa Aroma, an open art house where refugees, newcomers, people looking for asylum can find space, time, support there to develop artistically. And before she worked in Beurschouwburg. And then for our gender quotas, we also have invited Christophe Meijerhans. He's performance artist. Today he's mostly busy or engaged in XR, Extinction Rebellion. And maybe you know him from his performance, Some Use for Your Broken Clay Pots, which was a proposal for a new democracy. So, I don't know, today I was thinking, like, if one big change will happen in the arts in the coming years, at least one of these persons will be involved. Let's start. As warm-up, I was thinking, Anne, Rashida, Christophe, Agnes, if you would could start with, like, in 1 minute, share us some insight that you got from this strange period of the lockdown during this corona crisis. Is there something you realized that you didn't know before? And maybe Anne, I would like to start with you.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. It was my main insight was actually kind of a reminder that actually you have to think out loud, act and experiment in the now and not wait until there is a tomorrow, because I don't know, or we don't know if and when there will be a post-corona. I'm actually a bit doubting if there will be a post-corona situation. So try to experiment and act in the now. And yeah, so that was my main insight, try to shift, transform now and don't wait.
Okay. Christophe, what would you answer?
Well, I think actually what the thing that struck me most in this period is something I actually stopped or believing, or I doubted more and more, is that governments actually do have power. That actually, if they just want to, they can make big changes just from one day to the next. And that is something that was made extremely clear now in this period, just that you could put the whole economy on hold, just with governments deciding to do so. I mean, whether it's a good idea or not, I don't want even to go into this. I'm just saying that suddenly something of that scale can happen because politicians decide to do it. And this is a very big thing, I find, because it means that it brings them back into the scene as having a responsibility and as being actually some kind of important role that they have to play. So that's actually kind of good news in a way, I find.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Interesting. And yes.
No, voilà. I was thinking that for me, one of the unexpected impact of the corona was what it made invisible or visible. Theater suddenly, what we normally make invisible was suddenly invisible, but there were also a lot of things that were normally invisible that suddenly became very visible. Mm-hmm. How segregated our city is, or how racist it could be. Mm-hmm. Make the asymmetrical position even more visible than before.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Rashida?
I actually learned the importance of essential oil of clove.
Of?
I had clove, kruidnagel.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I had an abscess on my tooth, and what I usually do when I have something like that, I go to the dentist and I would get antibiotics, and I would always take them. I couldn't go to the dentist. I didn't know what to do. I asked for a couple of friends and connections about what to do about it, and somebody reminded me that I have a whole stock of essential oil at home, but I never even thought of using essential oil for an abscess. And so I made my little potion with the oils that are good antibacteria and so on. And I had to puff on my tooth, and actually after 5 puffings, 24 hours, the abscess was gone, the pain was gone. I mean, even with antibiotics, it would have taken a week. It would have took a week, and now it's just 24 hours, essential oil.
So you mean it's a kind of metaphor of that we have more close to us than we think, or that we have more?
Well, this is actually an honest answer to the question of what I learned, because for a lot of things that I heard around me here are things that I completely agree with, but it's not what I learned during this period. What I really learned is that, for instance, planting, I've always been telling myself and everybody, I don't plant because I don't have green fingers. That's not true. I don't plant because I never got the knowledge to do it. And so I looked up the knowledge, and now I have plants and they're blooming. And now I'm treating my own bobos with my own magic potions. And I really learned to do that during this confinement.
Oh. All right. I want to have like 2 movements in this talk. Let's talk like 20-25 minutes about the actual situation. I think it's important that we analyze it a little bit to see how the cultural field copes with the crisis and the possible exits. And then in a second step, that's the biggest question always, the possible pathways for change, what needs to be done. And maybe I want to start with you, Agnes. You have, together with Barbara van Lind and the other coordinator of KAI, published a letter to your public. I just read like 3 sentences. Is the term exit strategy not misleading? It will be a long time yet before this crisis is a thing of the past. Indeed, we must search for perspectives for a world with this virus, a new terrain in which life will be different. Is an open up strategy not more appropriate? So you put a question mark to this term exit strategy. What should be the main principles of this open up strategy? How do you do it today in KAI? Can you give us a little insight in that?
Yeah, maybe I'd like to say what we are normally doing or trying to do first, because it's I believe it's important. I was thinking what we are doing is, first, we are taking care of the arts as an art institution, and presenting is also part of this ecosystem together with the School of Art and the residency place, and that's what we do. And I think it's important to stay close to that, and to also be aware of the importance of that. We are receiving fundings, we have a building, there is a full team to do that in the first place. Then there is also a second line that has been initiated already since long in KAI Theater, and that's taking part in public conversation and bring some topics on the public sphere and voice certain concerns and bring people around the table to talk about that. Both are about bringing people together, no? And indeed, with the corona, certainly we couldn't do that. Then I think with Barbara, there are maybe 2 main questions that we brought that we wanted to explore with the team of KAI Theater and the artists. One was who can take part in these 2 lines that we are developing, making art, entering the venue to watch it, but also who can take part to the conversation, which voices do we hear, and to be conscious of the mechanisms that make that possible. And the second thing was also to reflect about how we are doing what we are doing, no? And to get that aligned with some values we are standing for. I think that corona or not, this is not changing. And that's exactly the difficulty of the moment, is that we are trying to take decisions that are close to those lines or to those values, and that it's taking time, and that's a long exercise and a long learning process, and that's something indeed that we don't see as an exit strategy, but rather as something that open up our mind, our imagination, our souls to other ways to do what we are doing. And that's rather I would love to come with a good story that I could explain in 2 lines, but that's not the case. It's rather a learning process together with the artist, with the audience and the team and the older partners. And so, yeah.
And do you have already like first results or ideas of this reflection, or is it still too early or too messy?
Yeah, we are not starting from a white page. Huh? It's there was a season, and there is a moral engagement that have been taken. There are people who are hoping to present what they have been working for so long. So some results, there are certain things that will just not happen because there is no rehearsal time, and some other stuff that are still on the program, and we are trying to understand how we can realize that. But we are also trying to understand how we can voice all those questions that the corona has made visible on the program, and to make room for that and understand what does that mean.
I was also intrigued by one sentence in the letter. We will be led by a search for alternatives, ways of coming together, rather than alternatives to coming together. It was difficult to grasp exactly what you see as the difference between alternative ways of coming together and alternatives to coming together. Can you explain?
It's a beautiful sentence Barbara has wrote, so I will try to project myself into it and interpret it. How I'm reading it is that yeah, when we decided to close the theater for 3 months, suddenly we realized that for sure we are presenting art, but mainly what we are doing is bringing people together. That's the first thing we do. And all the organization is really working towards this moment where people are together. And I think for us, it doesn't make sense to think that, we can just give that up and do something else and decide that this is not important. I think this is very important. And that's not only important for us, that's also important for activists or for schools or communities, people who are working around the fact that we are together in something, and also physically. And that's also part of the exercise and the learning process that we are now engaging, is understanding how we can do that still, and not decide that, we don't need that, we can do without.
Yeah. Because everyone is doing exercises now, like if we follow the measures, then it means that we can get in, I don't know, 10%, 20%. I read today that in Holland they will reopen the 1st of June with a premiere in ITA, International Theatre of Amsterdam, for 30 people. I've had it's like...
we are doing this exercise also. We are counting the seats, we are counting so many bubbles together. Maybe they can be 8 sitting on together or something like that. That's really not totally convincing, and there will be for sure things that we won't be able to realize financially. That's first, because on the stage they cannot be with 10 or 20 dancing together. That will not be possible. And we will not be 700 looking at it. So.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. In Kai Theater, the reflection is going on, let's say. Anne, jumping to you, I understood that Globa Roma did not close, although your atelier is closed now because it's not possible to keep it open with these measures, but that the organization itself is still working, that no one is put on temporary unemployment. What do you do then, or why was that a choice not to stop your practice?
At the beginning of the quarantine, we were thinking, okay, what are we doing? So in Globa Roma, we work in proximity with a lot of artists and creatives, and proximity doesn't always need to be physically. Of course it helps, but let's try to redefine this proximity. And then at the other hand, we try to facilitate the development of artistic practices. And sometimes, we often see there is an obstacle between the artist and the artistic practice. So we try to work via the arts towards the obstacles. Sometimes we connect to other organizations, social, juridical, for housing, to work that the obstacle got a bit removed. So now the obstacle was this crisis, and we decided, okay, what can we do? Maybe try to connect and be in proximity as much online. Not that we create that much content online, I mean, like shows that are online or concerts online, but try to connect in small groups online, have just conversations, check-ins. How are you doing? What are you doing? Where are you doing what you're doing? And also see how we can organize workshops. We did spoken word workshops, but also the art of cooking. We figured out what is possible actually to do online. We are still a bit working on that. That's not always that easy. And on the other hand, of course, not everybody has a possibility to connect through the internet. So we decided very early to call all the people we know or we have telephone numbers of. So just to ask, how are you doing? So normally we would have a conversation about the arts practice or the obstacles among that are in between. And now, yeah, we heard from a lot of people, we don't have internet, so we cannot connect with our family. We don't have there's no shower in my squat, there is no squat, there is no place to go. I don't dare to go outside, there is no food. I don't dare to go outside because there is police, I mean. It's difficult to get some food. So yeah, normally we would work together with organizations to work on these obstacles. So we called a lot of social organizations, but discovered quite early that there is a lot of pressure on these organizations at the moment. So we started to think out loud, how can we support what you're doing? And then, yeah, because actually there was really a need of a place in the city center of Brussels where people could come to for basic needs such as food, clothes, toilet, shower, and internet. So I thought, okay, we can open up Global Roma, but the infrastructure isn't not that easy. So we asked the Beursschouwburg with those beautiful doors to collaborate and to create a place where people could come and have some basic needs. So actually our support is still facilitating an artistic process or an artistic practice, but we are just offering or facilitating or supporting by working on the obstacles. So it's a very small transformation of the mission, but only we try to work with the context, because the context corona creates new obstacles. And for me it was important, or for us it was important, to also ask Beursschouwburg to open it up and not only work with organizations that are quite evident to work with, like social organizations, but to create a collaboration, an alliance between Beursschouwburg, but also Hobo, which is an organization working with a lot of homeless people, with cultuur working on food and recoup of food, Petit Rien with the VGC for showers. So it's with the Brussels Boxing Academy also for food. So it has become a huge collaboration, but only with a few people being together. But it's a big, important collaboration where a lot of people and organizations are learning one from the other. Just trying to reimagine, okay, how do you support artists, an audience, a community that is surrounding us, in order to become closer and to rephrase this being together. So that's what we've been doing so far.
Do you think it will have effects after in the future? I mean, this period is also creating something, or do you see it as a kind of special period that one day will be over and then back to normal, or is there no now and after?
I think we try to not do too much only ad hoc things, but what we do has, of course, also the purpose to plant some seeds and have like a structural impact. So we're also now, I mean, by having and by experimenting, that's why I said it at the beginning, by experimenting and trying out this, there is suddenly a conversation with the people in the Beursschouwburg. Okay, in end of May, end of June, this won't be over. Maybe the virus will be less present, and we never know. At some point, the virus will be less present, but there are still people surrounding us here, this building, this infrastructure, that might have specific needs, let's say obstacles that are in between them and, for instance, the arts. So how can an institution think of trying to support and facilitating these obstacles? So, and we are having this conversation, how can this also have a a next phase. Now we are working together with Hobo. These people are really learning us so much. I guess so many people that of Beurschapper, but also of Globaroma, we never had a conversation. We never connected that much with the people that are now coming to us. So we are really learning how to connect to so many people that are surrounding us. And by collaborating with a social organization that has a lot of experience in this and also is guiding us, and let's say, of course, I'm sure it will plant some seeds and make us think of how to use at least one of these doors that are a lot of time empty or closed, to rethink how you can open up these doors for a specific obstacle to remove. Or to
how do you look then to other institutions or cultural organizations that have, like, maybe not stopped, but at least are closed now, that are like more into unemployment? Do you think, do you miss that others also think in the now and act with the context, as you say, or?
I think it's normal that that at the beginning of this quarantine, people are a bit confused, and that of course you close the doors and you wait until it's over. So I won't judge other organizations, but I think when we are here in this situation, it creates an opportunity to also really redefine how you engage with people that are surrounding us and with an audience, let's say, because Agnes was talking about bringing people together and taking care of the arts. But taking care of the arts for me means also taking care of everybody who is surrounding us, because everybody is a possible visitor or possible audience. So and normally in a lot of classical arts institutions or organizations, there is an audience developer who is the one who is responsible for connecting with people. But now organizations have finally the time to really connect in different ways. And I'm sure if you really take this time to connect to people in a different way, take your time to, in the Beurschapper, a music programmer, performing arts programmer, audio communications manager, everybody is working there voluntarily. So of course, this way of communicating and connecting with people is really important for your institution and your organization on the long term, and will influence the way you create a program. You really need to take the time and to reflect on it. It's not that it's okay, I will open up my doors, I will have some toilets and shower and food, and hopla, now if we're ready, bring it on post-corona. But I do see an importance.
Okay, thanks for your sharing of thoughts. Christophe, I think if we want to discuss this question about the role of arts and culture in this situation, I think it's important also to analyze first what exactly is this situation, what are we victims of, maybe. How do you see this? Is it just the virus which created this situation, or what are we fighting against, let's say?
Big question, but if it's at least from a, you could say, ecological point of view, or from a bigger perspective, you could say that it's not a random virus striking like it would, it's not a normal thing in that sense, because it's clearly related to a much bigger problem, which is the ecological breakdown. The fact, this virus is man-made, just as the destruction of the Amazon is man-made, just as industrial farming is man-made. So it's our own it's our own production that is basically hitting back at us in a way. So I think it's probably the first time that it hits us in that way. I mean, that everybody is individually, personally affected in their own individual personal lives in Belgium or in Europe, let's say in the global north. Obviously, in other places in the world, that kind of stuff has been happening a lot more. People live this ecological breakdown in their flesh already for a long time. But I think it's the way it's kind of hits back at us here is puts in question our whole living culture. I mean, not only the arts, how do we function in the arts, but just the way we live. Period. Our whole how can we have to redefine the way we are we're living together as a society. Now, maybe more precise, more closely to us. I mean, the specific situation in Belgium, I think it's there's a very selective lockdown. Obviously, I mean, it's everybody should stay at home. Everybody should follow all these so-called social distancing. And we should say physical distancing. That is more accurate because we need more than ever social cohesion, basically. But that's maybe not a innocent choice of words. Who knows? But you feel that it's not. Of course, some populations are way more affected than others. I mean, this is the same divides, inequalities that is just being pursued and amplified simply. But you also see that there's simply a kind of a general ban on political expression and protests. I mean, there's a few examples, like for instance, this brilliant stunt that this person has done on the Bois de la Cambre, the kayak in the river. So he just does exactly what the minister says: take the kayak and do kayak. That's he does that, but it's just written regularization for the sans-papiers on it, and then he gets a total police set up and very violent. And this, see that this is not about the virus, is it? You have tons of different examples. I mean, Adil, of course, is exactly something like that. So I think there is different aspects to the question, obviously. So it's not only the virus, most definitely. A lot of other things are at play.
Okay. Yeah, because time is running, I jump to Rashida now. I think we will talk more about this analysis of like the impact of the broader system. Rashida, you have written an article. It was on the 20th of April, I think, in which you predict, together with Christophe Callewaert, a coming clash between health and wealth. We are now 3 weeks later. Is there a kind of update? We have the shops opening now. It's up till now, it seems to go quite well, or do we underestimate something?
Well, that article was actually meant to be a wake-up call to say this virus is here to stay, and we're gonna have to learn to live with it, because it's gonna have a deep impact on all levels of our society. And the way that we're gonna adapt to it is a conversation that we should be having right now. But there is not really a conversation. We have a government that is deciding which way that we're all gonna cope with it. And there is not really any way to find out of how people would want to deal with the new context of the virus, but because there's no conversation going on about what are the ideas out there. And that's what we called in that article the wealth and the health concept, because the strategy that is now being used by the government, whether they call it exit strategy or the lockdown strategies that they used and so on, all were meant at the end to bail out the economy. From the beginning of this crisis, we understood that neoliberalism and capitalism made sure that the capitalist countries could not deal with the immensity of this. And so the only way to organize around this virus was actually to try and bail out the wealth, the actual economical system, because that system depends on cheap labor. And during a lockdown, if you want to save people and crush the curve, then you have to lock people down, and that means you take away the labor, and you destabilize that economical system that was already very fragile. But also, we have to realize that this comes in a context that this virus is not standing on its own, like Christophe says. I call this the Age of Catastrophe. Indeed, we have not forgotten that the summer of 2019 was already the summer of all hell break loose, you know, with the Amazon on fire in Africa and Australian fires, but also the hurricane in Bahama, the pogroms in India. I mean, we could fill pages and pages of the catastrophes that only happened in 2019. And the virus is just part of all those catastrophes. And that's because of, yeah, what was I going to say? No, this part still, I wanted to explain about what it meant for us when we had a catastrophe, like Christophe said, that came also very close at home here. Like before the big catastrophes, we were always like watching them on our screens and saying that's far away. It always hits the othered bodies in the global south. But when it comes close to home, how did we react then? Well, actually, exactly the same way we react when it's far from home, namely choose who are the people that count and those that don't count on a local level. We could see that when the government sent this communique to the rest homes to tell them, if you have elder people that are too sick, please don't bring them to the hospital. There was not even a public debate about this. This is just something that everybody just accepted as being normal, because we've been living for 500 years in this system that is based on this triage system, you know, who is worthy of living and who isn't. And knowing that the whole system of capitalism has been built on that for 500 years now, that since the beginning we needed to compartment people. Like, for instance, capitalism needs cheap labor to organize their system. The cheapest, the better. Can we not have a lot of labor that's not paid for? That's even better. And that's how the system of patriarchy and racism got used as basis to this capitalist system, like slavery and the dehumanization of Black people led to very cheap and free labor to feed capitalism, but also women raising kids and taking care of all the care for free has nourished capitalism, but also separating the body and the mind, for instance, that permitted capitalism to exploit nature.
And you have the impression now that this crisis makes that extra visible to.
Not visible. It's just that we come to the end of the system, because after all these centuries of exploitations, you have all these exploited bodies that have been resisting to the exploitation, and we're in a moment of history where this all comes together in a culmination. We have had these last years movements like #MeToo that say time's up when it comes to the gender binaries and to this role that you attribute to women. We have movements like Black Lives Matter that say also what they say, Black lives matter, our lives do matter, because we live in a system where Black lives still don't matter. And also the exploitation of nature is coming to an end, because we have all these natural catastrophes are also nature's exploitation that came to an end. And it's all these movements that are actually putting more and more pressure on this system, and that makes us now deal with a systemic crisis of capitalism. And I think that's when you say what this would mean for art and culture, is how are we going to deal with this systemic crisis of capitalism? What is our responsibility in this? When you say wealth and health, when we're going to defend the health strategy, with health, of course, in its broadest sense, and that is very important. Health is physical health, but it's also mental health, and it's also material and financial health and social health and so on. And the responsibility of the art and culture is that when you say movement, because what we need is a movement to propose something for this systemic crisis that we're in. When you say movement, you say art and artists, because without art and artists, there is no movement. And what it means in terms of responsibility, I think, is what we should become aware of now.
Do we see it? I mean, in my impression, you have like big calls for solidarity, and at the same time, you feel, or my impression is that many people, institutions, because it's such a difficult situation, are like, trying to survive themselves individually. If maybe there is more a call for solidarity than there is actually solidarity. How if you ask for a movement, is it possible? And then the question is like, what is the first step? But maybe I have to ask the three others how they would react to this proposal. I could call it, I think, of a movement. I think maybe Christophe, you are already busy with a movement. I don't know how you relate to what Rashida is saying.
I relate totally to what Rashida is saying. But when it comes down to the role of arts, I think it's arts and culture. I see that the most important role there is in really functioning in creating new narratives, because we're really dealing with a need for a change of how we look at the way we live, what we consider being a good life, what we consider being something which is dignifying. These are all values which need to change. I mean, if you just consider the past 2 months with the whole limitations on consumption, the whole limitations in movement and everything, it's very humbling. I mean, you have to, especially the moment you start hearing that it might come again or last for a year or two, then it becomes very humbling, because you figure you need to reinvent many things. And I think this is probably where, let's say, artists are very good at reinventing imaginaries. That's kind of their core business, or our core business. And for me, the big question there is how to make this operation of reinventing narratives, which is always the case in art, obviously, but is mostly the case in kind of closed bubbles, or within very strict or very closed frameworks, you could say, or directed towards very selected people. So it is kind of very much, how you say, neutralized by the fact that it's actually functioning in its closed circuit. So that, I mean, that's a kind of an old discussion, obviously, of this, how to break out of the art bubble. And I think that finding ways of applying exactly this kind of reinvention of imaginary to other aspects of life is what would be needed. Find this transfer, find ways of making art operational, giving it traction on the real a lot more. And I don't know, I mean, there's very often the impression that art itself, the fact that we call something art, the fact that we just consider art as being something distinctive, the very fact of the autonomy of art, what we cherish so much, that is very much in the way of actually artistic practices gaining traction in the real. So somehow you could, I mean, there's very easy ways of looking at it in ways which are more complicated. I chose the very easy way, in the sense that I just said, okay, I stopped doing art somehow and I do activism. Mm-hmm. But in fact, what I'm doing is exactly the same thing. I don't feel I'm doing another work. I'm really busy doing the same kind of handiwork I'm doing, organizing, writing stuff, thinking of actions and things like this. This is pretty much the same work. Just it's being set loose, or has been detached from authorship, has been detached from that a conception of art being something which has to be original, which has to be, have a value in terms of social capital. I'm not saying that this is the only way of doing it. I'm also, of course, not doing art in the moment. I'm feeling kind of amputated from something. It's not exactly the same thing, but I think that there must be ways of reinventing. That's also an institutional question, but it's also very much a question to artists themselves of finding out how can we actually put that know-how, all these skills, at the service of something which is a little bit more concrete than reflecting or just creating images, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you say is maybe more easy for artists, like seeing not a big difference between, let's call it making art and activism, but I can imagine that it's far more difficult for institutions maybe, and that there is a kind of opposition between doing artistic activities and doing activism. It's a question, I think, for Agnes and Anne. How do you see this? It's often perceived as an opposition. Is it, or?
But yeah, I'm definitely following Rashida in the need of a new society. I'm also following Christophe in the fact that there is a true need for new narratives. I'm not totally convinced that all artistic work should be working in this direction, or we could also call it a sort of instrumentalization of the art, or I think it was Seba Hendricks who also said artists are being turned into future factory. And that's, I believe poetry is also a traction on the real, and that we should defend that also. And that's not only political action, and not everything has to be like labeled political. There is a lot of political action into the otherness of the art without being like labeled as such. No, I believe that artistic institution could totally support and make room for that. And I believe there is maybe two things we could do. One thing would be for me or for us to be consistent with the questions and not treat the need for change, a new narrative, as another festival, right? I think it's important to stay with and sit long with the same question, and to make room for that, and place and budget available, and to decide this is important and we want to not make a festival out of it, because that's also another neoliberal way to deal with any sort of question, but to really decide we stay with that. And the other thing is, I believe in long-term alliances with smaller organizations who are representing communities or marginalized part of society, and that this is also something for which you should make room, not only in your spaces and your building, but also in your budgets and inside your organizations, and to not use their voice to come support what you think is important, but to make room for them to decide what is the agenda we have to talk about. And I think that's the 2 points how we could contribute.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Anne, how do you see it? I don't know. We talked a little bit yesterday already, and then you said like, I don't see a difference, or in this acting in the now, as you defend it. What can we expect from institutions?
Institutions or organizations. I just wanted to say I thought, but it's because maybe I'm not an artist, that it was more easy for organizations and institutions to act than for individual artists or collectives, because of course there are different maybe financial precarities, or an institution or organization has often an infrastructure, other means than an individual. And of course an individual artist can act as a human being, and in that way maybe be more flexible in taking stands or doing or acting from a more activist point of view. But anyway, how for instance everything what Global Roma does or tries to do, or for instance now this this action together with Burgerburg and Hobo, for me, this is actually the kind of movement. It is a way to create a movement, because for me, a way of creating a movement is how you connect to people, and to indeed step out, break out of your bubble, and try to have new conversations, new alliances. And for me, also the creation of those new narratives Christophe is referring to. You create those new narratives together, out of bubbles, and in different contexts, and in emergency situations and in non-emergency situations, while finding out you have essential oil for your teeth. I just mean it's the way we connect to the people amongst us that makes us create those new narratives, and there the role of the arts will will follow, I would say. Or for me, this is also the arts. There is not really a distinction for me between the cultural purpose of an organization or an institution and the social or humanitarian way of behaving. It's for me, it's very much interwoven, and a lot of we see a lot of Brussels-based institutions, just like Burgerburg, using topics as community, love, care, togetherness, and then as topics for artistic programs. But then, of course, it's important also, if you really want to create a movement, to come out of your bubble and also do something very specific, concrete. So I think that's also a way of creating a movement.
On the chat, someone is saying it's about changing the conditions in which we operate, not about what art we make. I think we see a lot of both creative actions and changing conditions, I think. But I always wonder if that is enough in a way, or it happens in different places. I don't know, Rashida, do you have the feeling that we need a more common strategy, or and what would then be the first step to take if we all are like sitting isolated at home? Is it even possible to make a movement, or how do we start it?
I think the first thing the art and culture sector should do would be break out of being a sector. I think it all went wrong when it became a sector, right? Rather than being something that is part of a community, of a society in dialogue, in conversation, and that evolves together. And you can see that also in that letter that was signed by 300 people, where you could see that they make demands for the sector as a sector. Like, for instance, asking for an emergency fund, but within this context of ours, what does that mean? What would that mean? That would mean you would get millions through an emergency fund that will bail out the immediate need of artists. Of course, not argumenting that it's 12:05 to bail out the artists and, to make sure people have food on their table. That's not the issue here. But what does that mean to ask for it in the way they did within this context, is that you're actually making a loan from some kind of loan sharks, because afterwards they will just again will be standing in line, to also get share in the hits of austerity politics, because this money at the end, like the government is saying now, will all be they will go get it with the taxpayers, us, right? And it would go like this with all the money that is asked for. So as long as we don't challenge the fact that the money that would be given right now would be money that would be borrowed from our own pockets, that we also have to pay back tomorrow, then we're just postponing the problem. We're not solving it. And that's, I think, the first thing we should do, is to think of a way to bring all this proposition, all these ideas about how to bail out our mental, physical, and material health in some common way that would bail out everyone, because everybody now is organizing in different sectors trying to be built out. The situation that tens of thousands of artists are in right now, because of the broken system that was already there before coronavirus, makes that now we have tens of thousands of people that can't pay their rent and that are working for delivery services and so on. So yeah, it's been 12:05 to bail out people and so that they can pay their food, but this condition is shared with millions of other peoples, and we really are going to need a solution for everyone. And this is the moment, I think, that also allows us to do that creates this opening where the houses had to stop, where houses have to question how they're going to be operating in the next 2 years. That now that it's become clear that we cannot operate like we were doing it before, everyone is in the sector is now in the same situation of having to find a way to be able to operate. Well, this is actually the perfect opportunity to do that, but in a broader sense, by not postponing the problem, but trying to find a solution for everybody together by becoming part of the society again and stop being a separate sector.
Mm-hmm. Do you see, it's a question to the others, do you see other, I don't know, habits, structures that we should leave behind, that we cannot say that the virus is responsible, but that it's more kind of default or blocking in ourselves or in our sector, to use the word again. What should we leave behind, Christophe?
I mean, there's one aspect which I find still extremely, although it's of course there's a lot of people who work in different ways, but one aspect which I find extremely present in all of the art world is a cult of individualism. That is, I mean, you may make work that talks about collectivity and etc., but you do it from an individual artist position. I mean, not everybody. There's collectives, and there's a lot of work being done differently, but still, that dominant narrative of having some kind of a brilliant idea as an individual and kind of, that genius thing is still a cult that is being cultivated. I mean, it's still something which is kind of a role model for a lot of different things. The whole entrepreneur culture and the whole is exactly the same kind of vision on the individual being the solution, or being the place where to look for solutions. And I think what we see now is, of course, the moment we have shortage, the moment we have not enough of stuff, the only way out is to rebuild collectivities and to actually forget about the individual. So I could imagine that looking into that aspect of the art production could be quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. And yes,
Barbara and I were very inspired by this idea of radical health, that we could indeed think of a society in something that could be different, not only taking care of our mind, but also of our body, our mind, and our economy could be also different. And I think something that is in the way, and I'm agreeing with Rashida that the arts is not a sector apart, it's also a sector that is following the same rules and the same tricks and the same curves. And inside of the art and outside of the art, there is this mantra that this is the only way it can work, right? And the unpaid labor of the artist is very much this the part of this image that this is the only way we can have a sector or have a society if we're thinking of other unpaid labor. And that that we have to remind ourselves also that was argument that were used to justify the labor of children or slavery. This is the only way it works. And that And that this what Corona also made was also to make that even more visible, and that there is this I found also interesting that we had to take decision now for now, and not postponing big problems, but sometimes I really wonder if this crisis will be long enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a plea for a longer lockdown. Anne, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, again, something very concrete maybe. I want to get rid of the emptiness of our infrastructures. There are so many spaces within arts infrastructure that are empty. For instance, box offices that are huge and where only during the evenings people are queuing for their performances or concerts, and during the day this huge space is empty, and there are so many people in need of space during the day to take a nap, to charge a phone, to just be at ease. So this is something very specific, but I really want to rethink this whole empty space. Or not me, but we.
Yeah, I think maybe that's because we have to take a step to the conclusions. This we, I think, is maybe the shortest possible conclusion of the whole discussion. It's about skipping in individuality. It's about building a movement. It's about stepping out of the, who is the we? Is it just the sector? Is it us, the sector, or is it we in a bigger vision of the whole community or even humanity, also outside the art bubble? That was a word that was used. We heard a plea for not postponing but acting in the now. Changing narratives was also a plea of Christophe and of, I think, everyone here to that could be the power of artists in this moment. Maybe I want to do a final round, just some short question you want to give to the people listening to go to bed with, or a remark that you still want to give shortly about maybe something we missed in this. I don't know, Rashida, do you want to start?
Yeah, this is a very tough one, but I would like to add also to creating a new narrative that is also should be creating a common narrative. So it shouldn't just be new, it should be a common one. Mm-hmm. And so you start by seeking that communality first. And then when you do that, also to not forget to look to the places where art and art creation have been blooming in the margin, far away from institutions, far away from any kind of subsidies or places to house them. Mm-hmm. And that there are many voices there and in the art field. I don't know how to call it anymore. That are really blooming like crazy. I mean, from within the space, for instance, the fact that we're not even linked to a house anymore right now. This last weeks, we have been getting these phenomenal ideas for art creations that go from making anime linked to documentaries and video clips, but at the same time linked to a garden, a common garden that is also going to be intertwined into all these artistic projects. And at the end of the project, it will become a garden that can be shared in the whole neighborhood. So they're also taking the whole neighborhood in this art creation. And there's already a whole new dynamic. We don't have the house, but now we have the house of the space, I mean, but now we have all these houses in which this work is continuing, in squats where artists live, where refugees live. There's a lot of great ideas laying out there in how to proceed in these times when it comes to art production, knowledge production, and so on. And especially to look to the bodies that operated from the margin in our localities, meaning Black, people of color, queer people, and so on, and to maybe also use this time to seek the knowledge that has been created in those places, and where we might find some really great answers about how to take it forward.
Anne, do you have a final word?
Maybe we call it then the art bubble, and because everything is about bubbles now, for bubble merge with other, for people bubble, 8 with 8 later, and then the art bubble merges with the whatever kind of bubble, probably the economic bubble. No, I don't know, or a social, whatever. Anyway, my final word is maybe a good practice. I was inspired by an organization called Belgium United. They normally organize a football competition for people that don't have a home, and the whole trajectory amongst the football. And because, yeah, you cannot play football at the moment, all the people working, the employees working in the organization, they could have been temporarily unemployed, but they are now part of totally other organizations. So one is part of CAW, another for Hobo, another one for, let's say, Pro League even, and they're developing diversity and inclusion, if I understood it well. But so my question would be, okay, if you're working within an organization, how could you adapt this kind of practice, this good practice, to your organization? How would you work with your colleagues in completely different contexts? What would this context be? How could you support, and which other contexts would you support in order to create together these new narratives, this movement, this new connections?
Okay, clear. Agnes?
Yeah, I was actually thinking that for an institution as Sky Theatre, or for other institutions that are working towards the visible or something, suddenly becoming invisible is seen as a sort of a catastrophe. It's something we cannot afford, and it's also coming in a sort of a logic of growth, and we have to be vocal and visible and present in the media constantly about everything. And I was thinking that maybe in the future, in a world with a virus that would come back like every I don't know what, it would be actually very healthy for an organization to not be visible and to sleep like on a regular basis, and to have a period of very high activity and period of total invisibility, and mainly also to reassess the reason why we are doing what we are doing, and to not see that as a problem or as a catastrophe or as an illness, but really as something that is necessary.
It seems that you are becoming a little bit a fan of the virus, no? Or do I?
Not of all the effects, but I'm seeing potentially potentiality somewhere. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Agnes. And Christophe, the final word. Yeah, you are the minority here tonight, so you get the final word.
What an honor and what a pressure. No, maybe I would just like to bounce on what Agnes mentioned, the question of invisibility. That also for me relates very strongly to what Anne was saying about doing things together, the way you connect, the way you actually create the conditions with other players, actors to create things is very important. And that's invisible work in the sense, it's not what you see on stage, but it's how that thing is done. I'm just taking the stage as a metaphor here. Because it's very much about creating culture, constructing a new culture, more than just producing art as that is culture. And so that idea of doing art in an invisible manner, meaning not producing it, it doesn't result in objects or in things that are on display, but it's the practice itself, which disappears because it's actually invested in other fields, you could say. I mean, I'm not saying everybody should do that or this at all, but I think there's just simply this urgent need of deploying all that capacity of invention elsewhere and contaminating. That's then where we could just get inspired by this virus, contaminating very quickly ways of doing.
All right, thanks a lot, the four of you. I would say time's up, and that can have many different layers. Of course, 1 hour is way too short to solve it all, but I think we got a good idea of possible directions here. There's one word that I was also mentioned by different of you. It's called proximity. Maybe that's something to think about. Last week we were discussing the temporary unemployment as something that still had to be solved, and 2 or 3 days later Minister Nathalie Muilen really changed it. So let's hope that with the same effect of this talk, we have a movement in some days. When the Tuesday talk is talking about it, it will happen. Up till now, it happened like 3 days later. So let's hope the movement that's coming, it's not like coming from the sky. It's not because the government is deciding that it can come. It will start with all of us individually, but mostly together, probably. Be welcome next week. We are back to discuss then a very different question. It's like, what is Flemish culture? We talk about the Flemish character of the new vision of the minister on arts and culture. And one thing that is very important, and that it's exceptionally at 7 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock. So on the 19th of May, it's at 19 hour. I wish you all a good night. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening. Thanks to our 4 inspirational speakers. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh.
I think we are off. Yes. Thanks a lot. I hope you had all a good feeling about it. I had, actually. I think we, although time is short, if the goal of the talk was to open up some minds in a way, I think from my perspective we managed, but I hope you agree.
I do.
Yes.
Thank you for all the interesting input and interesting thoughts.
Yeah.
Are you still teaming up, Rashida and Agnes and Wouter and all the?
We're still.
I mean, like this.
I'm working.
And is it still possible to jump in, or is it too difficult for people?
You will be expected to jump in at some time anyway. We're just waiting for you.
Yeah, sorry.
No, take your time. No worries. No stress.
Mm-hmm. I'm always too late. I'm always slow. I mean,
You
these
work
kind of things.
We all are, but and our bodies also, we have to stop separating our bodies from our minds and give them what they need. How is your health doing now, Anne?
I'm fine. It really, I think the thing, whatever the thing was, it disappeared slowly. Every stage of my body has been affected by it, and then it was gone. Mm. And how are your bodies doing?
I cannot stand to sit here in this room anymore. That's really 2 months that I'm sitting in this chair, and it's really like, let me out. Yeah.
I actually never done so much sport as now. Like I'm going to run at least twice a week. It's crazy.
Nice. Really? Wow.
We did it.
And Christophe, you remember we had talks about the Invisible Festival. You remember that? That
that's what
in
you
2018, and I found the notes, and that's crazy how uncanny it's resonating with what we are having now. Huh? We were discussing about publishing like fat program, totally white, with nothing inside. And sort of, but that's what we can do now.
That was long before Corona, let's say.
Yeah, it was 2018. I found all the notes of our brainstorms, and it was, I mean, back then it was a good joke, and still when I'm reading it, there is a lot of points I'm finding like, that was a really good one. But but in the meantime, it's really a bit like, wow, so weird that, yeah, we could totally do it now, like tomorrow in the Invisible Festival.
It's happening. Don't worry, it's happening.
Yeah, it's happening. Exactly, it's happening. Yeah. But the question is, do you have to talk about it? That was also back then the question. This is why we didn't make it. At the end, why should we talk about it?
And would people go to nothing,
Exactly,
or just stay home
yeah,
to
exactly.
nothing?
Why would people be interested? And also, you know, like normally the sector is running on names and fame and publicity, and the Invisible Festival is not offering none of them. So it's a bit like
Yeah. In
Did
Germany,
you see in I guess in Prague, I mean, probably in different places, they are organizing the Festival of the Unexisting Things or something it is called. And it's exactly about nothing. But people can buy tickets.
I also got
reading.
I heard about an example. It's in sports. It was a German football club, I think in the second or the third or even the fourth league, that could not play anymore, but they were really in financial problems, and they organized the match against the Invisibles in a way. So they just put a camera on their empty fields, and then sometimes, like every quarter, there was like one team player like crossing the field, but for the rest there was like nothing to see. And I think they managed to make 150,000 people, fans, let's say, pay for this invisible match in a way. So they are saved by this invisible match.
yeah.
Football leading the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be anyway the case now, because now they announced that sport, we will be able to be with 2,000 people at the end of August. Have you read that? That they make sure that the Memorial Van Damme will take place, Dora? and you haven't read that? There was an article in, I can send that to you. Like by the end of August 2000, I was thinking, what the fuck? It's been like months thinking about how we will be 10 in our fucking venues, and now we will be 2,000 watching, I don't know what.
Yeah.
I've seen other very scary number saying that the perspectives for the arts and culture organization and institution is that 25% would go bankrupt. 1 out of 4.
Okay.
In the
Belgium. In Nederland is that 1 out of 3.
All right.
Okay.
Yep, scary times.
My sport is every 2 days a kind of obliged walk, which I will do now. So I will. My girlfriend says obliged. We go and take in some fresh air. But thanks a lot for the talk. Yeah.
Thank you.
In touch.
Enjoy your walk.
Yes, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Ciao.
In Zoom or
in the park.
in the Colorado.
In the park. Yeah. Ciao.
In the park. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.